every once in a while, I'm going to make a video about test taking skills, because whether you consider yourself a good test taker or a bad test taker, somewhere in between, everybody can benefit from seeing these tests more strategically, from squeezing every bit of information, every bit of data, every bit of evidence for or against a choice out of each of these choices. So the more we can do that, it improves our performance on questions on the margin. In other words, those tipping point questions that could kind of go either way for us, and overall maximizing our scores, regardless of what we know or don't know, right? We're kind of assuming a certain base of knowledge, and from that, what can we do to maximize our scores? Test taking skills is one of those things you can do to get the most out of what you know. So what I want to do in this video is go through the best way to evaluate answer choices. Now, we're assuming we're doing like an English or reading or grammar test. With math, it's a bit different because there you're not really evaluating choices. It's more just doing some calculations, finding your answer in the choice. It's a little bit different, though there is some approach to answer choices that might be beneficial even for math. But we're just focusing on like an English or a reading type test for this. And I'm going to go through 3 ways that many students evaluate answer choices, and then the one way that I think is the most effective way to do that. So if you hear yourself in the first 3 approaches, if that seems similar to what you do, then you really want to pay attention to the better way, because this might help you with those questions on the margin to just squeeze out a few more points and slowly, incrementally improve your score. So the first way that many students evaluate choices is like the most, I won't say the most simplistic, but the most direct, kind of just taking the choices as they are, not really doing much processing on each individual one. Essentially what they do is they just read each choice. So they'll read A, and then they'll read B, and then they'll read C and read D, and just get a sense of, okay, which one seems like the best option, which one, I'll go with my gut, which one seems the best out of the 4, and maybe it's choice C, and then we pick C, and then we move on to the next question. So very little strategic approach to each choice. It's just kind of read each one, see which one looks good, and go from there. Or even not even read each one. I mean, some students might just kind of look and try to just find the first one that looks good and then pick it and move on. So just very little overall processing of the choices. It's just trying to find a good one, or one that feels good, that seems intuitively good, pick it and move on. So that's the first way. The second way is a bit more intensive with the processing of the question, but still falls into an issue, so the strategy looks like this. So they'll do a bit more process of elimination, so it's a little less haphazard than the first way. So they'll read choice A, and they'll say, okay, A doesn't look right because of this reason, whatever that reason might be, and so they'll cross it out. And then maybe they'll read B and say, okay, B doesn't really look great because of this reason, or I don't understand it, or whatever reason they might have, they go ahead and cross out choice B. And then choice C, they say, oh, wait a minute, choice C looks pretty good, so I'm going to pick it. And then they pick C and they move on. They're done. Now, we'll talk about why this specifically has an issue in a second, this approach. I think you'll probably suspect it has something perhaps to do with choice D, which in this approach we haven't even really looked at. Once we saw that C was good, we picked C and we moved on. And as we're going to talk about, that's not really the best way to do it, because that could lead to silly mistakes and avoidable errors that we don't want to do. We want to be able to maximize our score. Making avoidable dumb mistakes is not one way to do it. We want to avoid that. But that's the second way. The third way, I guess it's not really a separate method, it's more of a variation on number 2, which is, again, they're evaluating each choice by choice, and they'll say, okay, A, that doesn't look good, it's wrong for this and that reason. And then they'll look at B, and they'll say, B doesn't look good for whatever reasons. And then they look at C, and they say, the excuse could be all kinds of things. It could be, I don't really understand what C is saying, or I'm not really sure if it's correct, like it may seem right, but then there's this, I'm a little bit uncertain. And the mistake they make is to make a decision on that choice immediately, to say, okay, you know what, I don't really know, so I guess I'll just get rid of it. And oh, look, choice D, that's the only one that's left, so I guess I have to go with choice D. And you can imagine the problems that could arise here. But the problem comes in when the student tries to make that decision on C right away, right? The first time we read it, we have to decide, is it right or is it wrong? And I have to make that decision, and I can't really go back on it. It's right. It's either one or the other. It's either right or it's either wrong. So let me make that decision and that decision will then have ramifications later. So if I decide that C, maybe I don't understand C completely, but, I just get rid of it, well, now I'm defaulting to D, which maybe D is right, but maybe it's wrong. So that's another, it's like a species of the second approach where we're evaluating the choices, but in this case, we're evaluating them as a binary. Either they're right or either they're wrong, and we have to make that decision when we read that choice, and when we read that choice, after we move from it, either we have to have decided if it's right or wrong, and that's it. And there are problems to that approach as well. So what all of these approaches have in common in terms of the mistake that they make, to different degrees, but certainly they've got this in common, is an inefficient and ineffective evaluation of each choice as a possible answer to the question. Because here's the thing with multiple choice tests. It's kind of the maddening thing about the tests. The answer is on the screen. One of these choices is the answer, right? It's in front of your face. So what the test makers, College Board, ACT Inc., what they have to do is, through various little tricks, hide the right answer and make the wrong answers seem more attractive in various ways. And we call those trap answers, right? That's their goal. They have to be able to hide the right answer in plain sight. What that means for us then is we need to be able to evaluate each of these choices in the most effective way to extract out the evidence, the clues, the trap answers, whatever it may be, to make the best choice given the knowledge we have in our head, right? If we're making mistakes on questions, not based on what we know, but based on the artificial presentation of this format, that's what we're running into issues, because multiple choice tests are completely artificial. And on the one hand, that's kind of annoying and that's the challenge. But on the other hand, I think good test takers realize this, therein lies the opportunity to get the most out of the test that we can, to get questions right that perhaps we have no business getting right, and avoiding mistakes that other students might make based on ineffective strategy. So what should we do instead? What is the better approach? It's very similar to 3. I think approach 3 was the best. We're going to evaluate all 4 choices. That is always something we have to do. So we have to evaluate all 4 choices completely. So when you look at approach number 1 doesn't really evaluate all 4 choices completely, just tries to find the best choice and then go with it and move on, right? Perhaps worried about speed, worried about timing, but just kind of looking at the 4 choices, not really thoroughly attacking each one, just trying to find one that looks good and moving on. And that's the most inefficient and ineffective way to do these, because you're not extracting all of the information you can from each choice. All you're doing is you're finding one that looks good, and that could be a trap choice, for example, and not really giving the other 4 choices their due. Same issue with approach number 2. In approach number 2, they evaluate all of the choices, and then they find the one that looks good first, but doesn't evaluate all 4, right? If I just pick, and I get rid of A, B, and C, and or A and B, and I pick C, well, what if it turned out that if I looked at D, D also looks good? Like, what if I think, wait a minute, D looks good too? Well, now what I have to do is evaluate between these 2 choices. If you think about it, this is a big mistake that many students make. They'll pick C, but they thought C was right for really bad reasons, and only if they had looked at D, they would have looked at D and realized, well, wait a minute, no, D is right. D is the answer to the question. They look back at C and realize, oh, okay, no, it can't be C for whatever reason, so I'll go with D. But if you just go with the first choice that looks good, even in a process of elimination, you can run into this issue. You can run into this issue of not fairly evaluating the choices and picking the first one that looks good, but if only you had evaluated all of them, you might have to rethink that calculus. So the first thing we always have to do is evaluate all 4 choices, always. You should never, ever not read a choice. If you find yourself like skipping choices because you think you found the answer, huge mistake. I guarantee you've got a number of leaks in your approach that you could just close up by reading all 4 choices. So that's the first thing. Second thing, and this goes into what approach 3 was doing, the mistake that approach 3 was doing, which is don't be afraid of ambiguity. Don't be afraid to be in limbo. So if you remember approach 3, what they did, so they said, okay, A doesn't look good, and then B didn't look good. And then we had problems with C. We weren't sure about it. Maybe we thought it was right or wrong. And the mistake was to make that decision immediately, to say, okay, I have to either decide this is right or wrong before I move on. So I guess I'll decide it's wrong, which means I guess I have to pick D. And the thing you have to do here instead is say, okay, I'm not quite sure about what's going on with C or D, or with C. Let me hold off making the final decision. Let me just put it aside, pretend I didn't even read it, and let me go look at D. Because there's a couple things that could happen here. 3 things, really. 1, you read D and you say, yeah, D is perfect. D fits this exactly. Maybe I'm still not sure about C. Maybe I think part of C might work and I'm a little uncertain, but I'm really certain that D is the answer. So C is gone, I go with D, right? So it kind of saves you the time you might have spent worrying about C, is this right, is that right, maybe doing a different approach, or right? You save all that time by realizing, oh, D is the answer, so I can just get rid of C. Done. That's one good thing that could happen to you. Another thing that could happen to you is you then read D and you say, well, D is completely wrong. I know for a fact that it's wrong. So all I'm kind of left with here is C, and maybe I'll look at the other choices and decide that maybe I'm still confident that A, B, and D are wrong. So even if I don't completely understand C, I pick it, right? So the key here is being okay waiting, right? This could happen in the beginning. Like if we go to choice A, like you might read choice A and be like, oh, I don't really understand it, or maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, I'm not really quite clear. Just wait on it. Just hold it aside, put it aside. You don't have to worry about it immediately. Evaluate B, C, and D, and a lot of the work there might be done. Like you might get rid of B, C, and D immediately, and then the answer is A. You might get rid of B and C, and then you're stuck between D and A. That's the third thing. So you would evaluate all 4 choices, and you would be down to 2. And then when you're stuck between 2, that's when other strategies come in, which I've talked about elsewhere in this series and in my courses. But in any event, when you're stuck between 2, that's kind of a different situation. But those are the 3 scenarios. So be comfortable in that uncertainty, in that ambiguity. You do not have to make a decision on a choice the first time that you read it. Wait, hold it aside, evaluate the rest of the choices. That could make your decision easy, or it can make it difficult if you're still stuck between 2, but it very often will make your decision easy. You don't have to make that decision, because again, if you decide to get rid of C prematurely, then you're kind of sticking yourself with D. Whereas really what should happen, if you get rid of C, you should evaluate D and say, well, wait a minute, no, I think even though it's the last one, D is not right. I know it's not right because it's just not an answer to the question. So now I've eliminated all 4. Now I have to go back and reevaluate all 4 choices, right? If you just go based on what's left, that's a choice you've made based on the artificial format of the test. That's not a choice made based on what's the best answer or the worst answer, right? That's based on the way that the choices are ordered. So always evaluate all 4 choices and be okay not completely considering a choice the first you see it. Hold off on it, move on, complete the rest of the choices, then see what you're left with. See what you have available as choices, and it may actually simplify the question quite a bit for you. And the third and final tip, which I've been demonstrating actually throughout the video, is mark up the choices. And there's different symbols and formats for you to do it, but I like to put a little check mark if I think a choice looks good, or cross it out if I don't think it's good, or put a question mark if I'm uncertain. But you want to mark up the choices. When I look at students' test booklets or their practice sections, if I don't see any marking on A, B, C, D on your choices, or F, G, H, J, whatever the case may be on the ACT, that's a sign to me that you're not being 100% efficient, that you are perhaps doing one of the approaches that we talked about previously, especially the first one, which is just kind of looking at each one and kind of in an unorganized way finding the best option. You want to mark up your choices, because this is what's going to help you avoid mistakes. It's going to help you efficiently tackle the questions and the choices and extract out every piece of data and information you can get to make the truly best choice based on what's there and based on what you know, to really maximize your points. So if you have any other comments, if any of this sounded familiar to what you do, if you have any other strategies or approaches to evaluating choices, feel free to leave a comment below. And I hope this video helped, and I'll see you in the next episode. To learn more about Reason Prep's SAT, SAT subject test, and ACT video courses, go to reasonprep.com/enroll. And you can find the link in the description below the video.